Who here likes waiting? No one? Really? Well, what about, do you like waiting when there's like struggle or stress or suffering involved in that waiting? No. Okay. Yet in life, I think we wait a lot, right? We find that we feel like we're waiting for so much. And sometimes it's obvious what we're waiting for. You know, maybe it's a new baby, maybe it's a new job, maybe it's that holiday. But we feel like we're waiting a lot. And sometimes we don't even know what we're waiting for. Sometimes the thing we're waiting for, it seems to be just beyond the horizon. And we could just see it if we could just run after it. Or sometimes it feels like we're waiting for something that's so beyond our grasp. C.S. Lewis says, if we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. So today I want to explore with you how our passage today answers three big questions around waiting. First, what are we waiting for? Then why isn't this it? And third, and finally, how do we get there? What are we waiting for? Why this isn't it? And how do we get there? First, what are we waiting for? For some of us, this is the hardest thing to realize because so often we put things in the way of what we're really longing for. When we realize that what we're longing for is beyond our grasp, what we often do is try to fill it. We fill it with all the other stuff, these facsimiles of what we actually long for. And at best, those things just kind of numb us. They numb us from that longing, from that thing that we actually want. And from someone that has an addictive personality, I know that when you just try to fill that thing, what you long for is more and more. And it's never enough. Because it's not actually what you long for. And usually most of the time, that thing isn't enough. You find that longing coming up anew. Or other times, sometimes in our lives, we experience what we long for. We experience this transcendent, radical kind of joy, this love, this belonging that seems so magnificent. And we just long to live in that. But it doesn't last. And so when we experience that, we usually try to ground it in the things we know, the things that are right here. And we usually try to grasp at those things again and again and more. But those are not the things we long for. Because what we long for is something beyond what is right there in front of us. The joy comes from something else. So yet again, our longing keeps speaking truth to us, keeps pointing our way forward. For a quick moment, I want to look at one of our passages today from Isaiah 65. I'll get it right up here. Because I want to go through this with you very quickly, because there's a lot here, about what Isaiah is trying to point us to. He's trying to show us what we long for. And in the context of Isaiah, this is saying so much more than we even realize. So we start out with the new heavens and the new earth. And that follows directly with this kind of forgetting, where the old things will not be remembered or they will not come to mind. And in the context of Isaiah, what we realize this means is not that all the good things are forgotten, but actually all those things that seem to imprison us. All those things that hold us back from real relationship. All those fears that stop us from reaching out when we really need it, or reaching out when really others need it. All that greed that says we will never have enough. All that guilt, all that isolation, all of those shall be washed away. We will live in a new way. And we see directly following it, what will be filled? What will fill that place? A forever gladness, a forever rejoicing. Because right there, we shall see what God is creating right there in our midst. We shall enjoy what is right there in front of us. And even Jerusalem. Jerusalem, which in Isaiah's day became like every other kingdom in the world. A place of persecution, a place of tyranny, of greed, of violence, even it shall be made new. And God will dwell there, and its people will be a delight to him and one another. Just imagine that, a world where everyone is a delight to one another. Isn't that something we long for? Where we should just find joy just by looking at one another, just by seeing their joy, by seeing all that they have. And then we see directly following that, there will be no more weeping, no more crying, because it will be heard no more. What that is telling us is that all anguish and helplessness will be no more. Why? Because we won't be helpless. Because we'll never experience that immense anguish and loss. Because God will be there. And then the next slide, we see directly that death is overthrown. That utter loss will be no more because children won't die at a young age. Even the elderly will live to a great life. They'll live a whole life. And even at the age of 100, that will seem like not enough. But really, this is just Isaiah's first fruit of seeing the everlasting life that comes with Jesus. You see that more through Isaiah, but this is just the beginning of that vision of an eternal life, of endless joy and prosperity. In the next slide, we see that our work shall be our own. Now, for so many of us, we work under many other people and they see the fruit of our labor. But in this moment, we actually get to enjoy our own work. No longer shall work be a slog. It will be a delight. That's one of the curses of the fall, right? Was that the work shall be strenuous, but the work shall be our delight too. Because it will be ours. And in the context of Isaiah, we find that it will be all of ours. We'll share in our work together and we'll find joy in that work together, in the prosperity that God puts into our midst. Isn't that something we long for? And it goes on from there, that we find that the bounty is laid out, that all work shall be meaningful and all life shall be blessed. How can this ever be when this world seems like anything but? It's interlayered through all of this that it comes through God. It is a blessing of God. It is God speaking and being in our lives. So we can already begin to know this. We can already see it just by getting to know Jesus, just by being here, by beginning to see that kingdom as it pours out in this place. There's more than just this. There's more than just these things that we've begun to explore, but this is just the beginning of pointing our longing towards something more. Now, I don't want to spend long with our second question, why this isn't it. Because I think that becomes painfully evident when we see where our longing actually points. Because this world isn't it. I want to point to the very last slide. Yes, thank you. So this slide actually helps us realize why this world isn't it. And why in some ways this world can't be it. Because what do we see? We see the wolf and the lamb feeding together. The lion will eat straw like the ox. For this to happen, something drastically needs to change. Their very nature needs to change. The very bloodthirsty nature of the wolf that desires after food or sustenance at something else's expense, that needs to change. The very fear of the possible teeth that could be the utter desolation of that lamb, that fear needs to change. And then in an eternal level, the lion needs to change. What it desires after, what it needs to eat, how it sustains itself, how it hungers. From an internal and a relational level, our very nature needs to change. And then the snake needs to be put in its place. The same thing needs to happen to us too. This isn't just about animals. This isn't just about the world around us. This is about us too. We need to change in a way we live out our lives, in the way we live together, and even in our insides. We need to actually see where our longing points instead of just trying to fill it. And then we need to put sin in its place. Before we get to the third question, how we get there, I want to just talk a little bit more about waiting. Because at the same time that I think we all dislike waiting, we all see its point sometimes. We experience that waiting can actually be very important. Just think about giving birth. If we just ask for it to come right away, what does that mean? Well, it means some bad things for that baby. So sometimes waiting is really important. And we've experienced this. Even if we haven't been a mother, we've experienced this in jobs. You know, when you put that extra work in before a vacation, right? You know you need to put that work in to let everything settle. But then you know something is coming along the other end, so that work becomes even easier, right? And so knowing what we're waiting for can make the waiting easier, right? But then we also know that the waiting is part of the process too, is part of the good that will come. I was an actor for a long time, and I experienced life with no work. And what I found was that my play didn't mean as much. Actually, I didn't enjoy my vacation, my time off, because I longed to actually have a purpose, to be doing something, to change the world. And so I knew that work was a part of how I enjoyed the time off, the Sabbath. Work was just as important. The waiting was just as important. And in God's context, it's just as important too. Because as Peter reminds us in 2 Peter 3, do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, the day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. That's what our waiting is about right now. We want everyone to come to Christ. We want everyone to know that joy right now, so that in the time to come, we will enjoy it with them. And so does God. So how do we get there? The third question becomes one of the most difficult to face, because by facing it, we have to recognize what needs to change in this world. And that is not easy to face. We hear in that second reading all of these warnings of war, of suffering, of false leaders. And what we're seeing is that the snake is being put in its place. We are seeing what the law of Moses did. It is showing sin for sin. Or showing sin for what it is. The same thing happens through the whole book of Revelations. As people turn to idolatry, pride, and greed, evil is allowed to show its face. It comes to full light. And there we see some awful things that evil has been doing the whole time. Wars break out. Good people are put in prison, are isolated, are persecuted. And God's followers are even killed. And even creation shows the evil that has been planted in it as earthquakes happen, as plague and famines break out. Right now, one of the hardest things is that evil can disappear. It can hide in the background and slowly shift and hurt our lives. It can do the same in us too. And that can be really hard because it hurts people that are right around us too. The light of Christ will bring all evil to the surface, and these will be its death pains. Or in light of the glory of the new creation, this will be its birth pains. Longing for that new thing, that new life. It is filled with so much joy. Now, I know this is not something easy to talk about or even to think about. And I know personally that I do not like war or violence. and I would like to think that it has no place. And I want to be clear that in none of these passages or in Revelation